Hello, all, and welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos on the face of the planet to talk about movies. And as usual, we are going to be talking about a big name movie this week, that, of course, being Pacific Rim Uprising. Everyone's going to see this movie. What do we think? Do you care what we think? We hope so, and we'll see. We're also going to be dishing up some movie news. It's been a couple weeks since we've had a chance to do that, so we're looking forward to chatting about a few items with you guys. But before we do all that, let me introduce you to my wonderful co-hosts, two people I literally could not function without. Jim Pugliafico, welcome to the show.
Thanks, and welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Glad to have you, babe. And Will Lindis is here, too. Welcome, Will.
Hey, listeners. And hey, Brad and Jim. Feels weird not having you here in my backyard, week two of us being virtual. But whatever. I'm looking forward to us drifting into this review together.
Oh, drifting. The Pacific Rim job puns begin already.
It's like we have a mental link between us.
Right? It almost is kind of like that. Whether that's a good link or a bad link remains to be seen. But hey, we also want to give a shout out to our listeners. We've got some folks who are hopping on to the live chat with us right now. Hey, everybody. Love seeing you with us. We'll do our best to catch up with the comments in the chat. Feel free to say hi. Share your thoughts on Pacific Rim Uprising. And for those of you listening on digital tape delay through iTunes or Stitcher or our website, we love you too and want to hear from you. So feel free to let us know your thoughts on Facebook or Twitter. Guys, we got a big show. We got a lot to talk about. Are we ready to dive into some movie news?
Let's do it.
Let's go.
All right. Then here we go. Some movie news. All right. So, Will, what's got your interest this week?
Yeah, so there's been some news and then some buzz about what may have caused that news that's been circulating today because of a change to the release date of the newest two upcoming X-Men movies. And that's X-Men Dark Phoenix and then the side project New Mutants, which is the Josh Boone directed horror film that was originally due out April 13th. So supposed to be coming out like in the next couple of weeks. Well, that's now been pushed back. It's not been pushed back a month. It's been pushed back like 10 months to February 22nd, 2019.
Whoa.
Well, and then there's more. And then that date was then pushed back even further. So now its new release date is August 2nd, 2019. So we've had two sets of pushbacks on this film alone. The X-Men Dark Phoenix movie, it's only been pushed back about 3 or 4 months from November 2nd of this year to February of next year. So why is this? So first of all, one of the things
in the movie world, nothing good happens in February.
Well, there's a couple of things that have happened here, right? And so the biggest thing that's happened is there's this like rumored kind of behind the scenes, nothing signed or fully fleshed out yet, but agreement happening between Disney, Marvel, and Fox to share some of these properties, similar to what happened with Spider-Man and Sony a while back. So a lot of the buzz and the scuttlebutt is that Kevin Feige, who's over all of Disney, Marvel, Cinematic Universe, didn't like some of what he saw and kicked it back. And that's, if that was part of the agreement, then that's part of the agreement. We don't know. This is just speculation. What we do know is that as a result of whatever it was that happened when those test audiences and all of the backroom deals and all of that stuff happened, they are doing some massive reshoots to New Mutants. Over 50% of the movie is going to be reshot. They're going to be adding in 1 to 2 new characters who will supposed to be present throughout the entirety of the film. So this is a massive overhaul to this film. So with New Mutants, that's troubling. Dark Phoenix is a little bit more direct. There are some shoots, some kind of the basic run-of-the-mill reshoots that you would expect here. But a lot of the cast and crew of that, like Sophie Turner is currently overseas doing Game of Thrones shots right now. So they just can't get her on set until summer. And so they're just not going to have time to finish it up. So that's a big part of that one there. So I want to urge everybody to not panic too much. Sometimes reshoots mean that the film is in trouble. And you see that with like Justice League, you know, those reshoots, when those came through, you ended up with 2 movies that were kind of crushed together. But then you also have movies like Wonder Woman had a lot of kind of production issues and reshoots during development that made people panic. And that ended up being a pretty good movie. So don't panic too much. But yeah, if you've been banking on seeing New Mutants next month, just hold off for another I don't know, until August of 2019, and then you'll finally get a chance to see those movie characters come to life. How do you guys feel about this?
Well, I can't say that I was probably one of the ones, you know, waiting around for these movies. You guys know by now, I just kind of take these superhero kind of movies, tentpole things kind of as they come, and the same will be here. But I mean, it is worrisome that they have to reshoot so much of is it the New Mutants one?
Yeah, that's the one they're doing the massive reshoots.
That sounds like it's kind of a mess. Can you imagine like being the director or producer of that movie and then going to the studio head and he's like, oh man, just trash like half of this movie and start, almost start over. It's gotta be, man, like the guy be saying like, or woman be saying like, ah, man, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know, not super encouraging maybe. Will, I know you say not to worry. But I mean, that's a long time. And usually they're pretty on top of some of this stuff. So I understand with Sophie Turner and Game of Thrones, like obviously, they have to work around that for the new X-Men film. But New Mutants, that's supposedly set up by Logan, right? Was that what the end of Logan was supposed to kind of take us to, or is that different?
That's different because end of Logan is set in the future. This is set in modern day. This one is it's in that same universe with like the current X-Men movies and technically Deadpool. Okay. But its big hook was it was the one that it was going to explore it more as a horror film than as a superhero film.
Right. So I almost wonder if the differences in like tone / almost genre to some degree played some kind of role in this. I mean, I don't know what the studio expectation was versus the filmmaker expectation, but I don't know. I mean, still going to see them both, obviously.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a little bit longer. So interesting seeing, how the process works in the back end sometimes.
Yeah, and maybe Kevin Feige, he's the head of Marvel too, right?
Right. Yeah, that's where he's head of Disney Marvel.
Right.
Marvel's
and his hands are in this one as well.
Well, not directly, but there's been a lot of for the last few months. There's been a lot of like kind of insider buzz about Fox and Disney kind of coming together on a deal similar to what Sony and Marvel came to with Spider-Man to kind of share characters. So if they've been having these conversations and if there's a lot of money that's on the table and if Disney Marvel is like, hey, we saw this thing that you guys are working on and we're not very happy with it, that's the type of thing that can affect one of those deals before the ink's even been signed. We don't know that for sure. Like this is a lot of speculation, but it's pretty plausible because we do know that Disney keeps a tight lid on anything that they're working with. They want to make sure that everything matches their vision.
Very true. All right. Well, we'll see. Jim, what have you got this week?
Well, I've got some kind of positive news this week. I think we could all maybe use some positive news. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So last week we talked about how we kind of all liked the the crowd-pleasing movie Love, Simon, right? About a gay teen. He's struggling to come out. He's in high school. Well, that movie's doing really well. It holds like A+ cinema score. It's got 90+% on both aggregates on Rotten Tomatoes, critics and audience. So it's doing very well. It's making pretty good bank at the box office. And, you know, it's definitely been a really good movie that, you know, that we've been celebrating. And I guess a couple of well-known celebrities are also fond of this movie. Last week, both Kristen Bell and Neil Patrick Harris bought out screenings in 2 different cities so that people could see the movie for free.
Wow.
Which was pretty awesome. There's a couple of tweets, one from Kristen Bell, which I'll read here. She says, Love, Simon is a knockout. This was on her Instagram page. There are so many important stories that don't get made. I'm so grateful this one did. I had absolutely nothing to do with the making of this movie. I just have a huge crush on it, and I'd like to share the love. So Minneapolis, please enjoy a screening of Love, Simon this Sunday on me. Enjoy. So that was pretty awesome. And then Brad in Albuquerque.
What?
Yeah, Neil Patrick Harris's hometown. He said, so my husband David and I enjoyed Love, Simon movie so much, we wanted to pay it forward. Others are doing this, and I'm so on board. So we bought out a screening at a theater in my hometown of Albuquerque for this Sunday afternoon. It's free and a great chance to see this wonderful film. So, yeah, I mean, good stuff. You know, obviously this happened in the past. It's not like our listeners can go jump on a free screening, but can you imagine how cool that would have been to, you know, be able to get to a free screening, you know, kind of funded by somebody like Neil Patrick Harris or Kristen Bell for this movie. I think that was really sweet. And, you know, I hope more celebrities end up doing this thing. I think I heard them that this was also done for A Wrinkle in Time. I think Oprah or a couple of the stars, or maybe the director Ava DuVernay, got together and bought out some screenings of A Wrinkle in Time and allowed, you know, invited people to go see that. So I hope it continues. Keep the love train going.
Yeah, we've seen that a few times recently. Not enough, but with Love, Simon, with Wrinkle in Time, Black Panther screenings, a lot of that happened a lot too, with the full theaters being bought out, and there were even sort of the first trickles of that with Wonder Woman. And one of the things that's unique about each of these 4 films is that they all are mainstream films that highlight a you know, either women's issues, Black issues, or LGBTQ youth issues. And so it's nice that these films that are all about representation of groups that need more representation are getting a chance to be pulled into these theaters and be able to see themselves on screen. So yeah, I'm all for this.
Yeah, hope to hear more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to see that this is happening. It's interesting to me because after our show last week, where we all kind of expressed our love for this film, I heard from several friends who were like, that movie's terrible. It sucks. It's awful. It's like every other rom-com out there. And, you know, it's a bullshit movie. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, this is like one of the first like gay teen, like serious, you know, rom-coms we have. So like, yeah, there's some echoes of similarity maybe, but like, I certainly didn't think that like, I don't know, it sucked or it was all that. So it's really heartening to me to hear that support for this movie is still so strong and that this is happening because, you know, I feel like even if rom-coms are a tired old trope at this point, this is sort of a new and refreshing spin to see. So I hope the Love, Simon train continues.
Yeah, we deserve to be able to see ourselves in tired rom-coms or formulaic action films or any of those types of things that are normally the domain of the straights. I think even if, you know, and that was even kind of, it's not unfair to say a lot of the tropes and things in Love, Simon are very similar to what you see in every other rom-com.
Oh, yeah,
But it's wonderful that we get to see ourselves in that particular role, that we're not relegated to the art house, that we're not in that one little indie darling film, you know, that we can see ourselves in the popcorn munching. You don't have to think too hard, but still have a decent enough time at the theater film. I love that. So I think that's actually a feature, not a bug.
I agree. All right. Well, we'll see if that keeps up. Speaking of features, there was a feature film that came out a while back, and Jim, you're wearing a Star Trek shirt tonight. How fitting. I'll focus the camera. There you go. Captain Kirk himself. Nice. So Star Trek Beyond came out a couple years back, and I know when we talked about that film on the show, one of the things we were surprised to see was that people weren't going out in droves to see it like they did with Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness. And it still made a lot of money. I mean, it's not like it was a total flop or anything. But there's been sort of this lingering question as to, you know, why people didn't go out and see this movie like the others. And the go-to excuse has kind of been like sequel fatigue. Like, oh, it's the third movie in the series. You know, people just, you know, aren't as on board with it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Simon Pegg recently gave an interview to Geek Exchange, and he was talking about why he thought that this happened. And he had a few thoughts. He said that one, he felt like the marketing for the movie was terrible. For one, it didn't get going until late, which was actually something that we said as well. Another thing he said was that they tried to market it as a giant action film. And if you've seen the movie, there are some big action moments, but like for the most part, spoilers for Star Trek Beyond, they're trekking through the woods and having character moments. And, you know, like that's not the mainstay of the film. And so it's being marketed that way. People are coming out and they're like, well, this wasn't the crazy action movie we thought. Don't go see it. We all know how marketing can fuck with things sometimes. Something else he said was that they reused the Beastie Boys Sabotage song from the first movie, which was a complaint that I had. And because that song was also used in the trailer, it spoils a big moment of the film. And I guess he was pretty pissed off because he felt like people didn't go see the movie because the reuse of that song made people feel like, wait a second, we're getting the same thing all over again. And then the last thing, that year was the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. And this is the part that I found most interesting. Apparently, the studio decided they wanted to divorce themselves from rah-rahing the 50th year celebration because they didn't want their new Star Trek to be like bogged down by perceived 50 years of old Star Trek. And so I'm curious from your guys' perspective, like, do you feel like those things explain maybe some of why Star Trek Beyond didn't do as well? I mean, does Simon Pegg's arguments here hold water for you?
I think they sort of do. Certainly the marketing was an issue. There was nothing in those trailers that was like super exciting. Plus there were some things in the trailer themselves, like it showed like the motorcycle leaps and all of that stuff, which doesn't feel very Star Trek, and it makes a little more sense in the context of the film itself. But when you just see like motorcycle leaps and shit like that, and you're thinking like, well, this isn't my Star Trek, you know, like this isn't what I was expecting here. So all of that I think is very true. Anytime you have an anniversary, that is like built-in marketing gold. And so just being able to, I mean, honestly, if they had tied that together, more people probably would have wanted to go out because they would have been more nostalgic for those characters and wanted to see, well, what's Captain Kirk up to now? But outside of all of that, and one thing he didn't hit on that I think is also important, and at least from my recollection, Star Trek Into Darkness, I felt like has had a decline in popularity since it came out. Like I've heard people kind of more critical of that film the more time that distances from that film. And so I think by the time we get the third one coming out, and I think a lot of people were sort of re-examining the second one, not panning it, but we're kind of like, well, okay, you know, this wasn't like the best Star. This wasn't exactly my Star Trek either, and shit. I guess they're doing a third one. I don't know if I'm as into that. So I think there were a lot of factors going in there. I think Simon Pegg hit most of them, though.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, marketing certainly. I think there's just a fatigue of this, maybe this Star Trek series. The first two, I mean, the first one was okay. The second one, I don't know. It like you said, the marketing and the some of the stuff in that trailer, like the motorcycle, Kirk on a motorcycle jumping shit. A lot of people had like pretty mildly adverse reactions to some of that stuff, and I think that might have alienated some people from seeing it. I mean, hardcore Star Trek fans are going to see it anyway, but it just didn't really. I don't think it caught the attention of the public enough. It's a shame too, because the new Star Trek series Discovery is great, and if they hadn't already started this franchise, this timeline that they're on, it would have been a great time to switch over to something like Star Trek Discovery. I think that would have done a lot better to build a franchise on, and maybe they will down the road. As far as a third movie, it's still kind of up in the air. The second one really didn't. I mean, it barely, I think, might have made back its money, but it didn't. It certainly didn't make a profit, and there's been some talk about Quentin Tarantino, of all people, getting involved in Star Trek now, because I guess he wrote a script for the third one, and it's kind of up in the air whether they're going to do that one, whether he's going to direct it, or if it's even going to get made at all at this point. So we'll have to see what happens. It's a shame. I mean, I kind of like that movie. I've kind of liked both movies, but then again, I'm kind of a semi Star Trek nerd.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, right? We've had 3 of the new Star Trek films. We had Star Trek 2009, we had Into Darkness, and then we've had Star Trek Beyond. So I agree with you, Jim. I think the first 2 films in the outing are probably the strongest of the 2 from like an audience attendance standpoint. With the third doing the way that it did, we'll have to see what happens with a fourth movie. Given how popular Discovery is at this point, I don't know if that is like a translation to the new Trek movies, though, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, we really hate the new Trek movies. Discovery is taking us back closer to our Star Trek, right? So plus they're in different universes. So like, I don't know if one can capitalize on the other or not, but I guess we'll see eventually.
Yeah, especially if we get that Tarantino one.
I know.
It's possible that if the new TV series may have roped in some new fans that would go see a fourth movie, even if it's not in the Discovery timeline. You never know.
Maybe if they like brought Zachary Quinto in to like play Spock or something on Discovery, like if Spock ever has a guest appearance since they take place in the same time frame, that might be one way. But I mean, beyond that,
yeah.
Although even that gets like really, really sticky, because these are in 2 different, even though it's the same time frame as original Trek, it's like this is 2 separate universes, right? Like
it is
Kelvinverse versus Roddenverse or whatever it's called.
The Prime Universe, yeah, but Quinto could still play a young Spock, just that universe's version of young Spock versus new Trek.
Yeah. I think he could. I think the problem you run into is I think people now very much associate him with the new Star Trek. And so it would I think people would logistically get it, but I don't know that it would necessarily have that same curb appeal, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you guys, Star Trek Discovery is my Star Trek mainstay at this point. I like it so much better than any of the new movies that have come out. So if we don't get a fourth movie, I'm actually kind of okay with that, as long as we get more Discovery. So anyway,
why not both?
We'll see. Well, guys, speaking of sequel fatigue, how do we feel about talking about Pacific Rim Uprising? Are we ready? Are we there?
Let's do this thing.
All right, excellent. Well then, guys, we're going to go ahead and switch to our discussion of Pacific Rim Uprising. We will talk about the movie, of course, spoiler-free for a few minutes, give you our initial thoughts, whether we think you should check it out in theaters, maybe wait for rental, or skip it entirely. And then we'll give you a fair warning before we open up the can of spoilers. But all of that said, here we go, our discussion of Pacific Rim Uprising. Bwom. All right, so Jim, give us the basic setup for this movie, if you will, and your initial impression. Should people check this out or not so much?
Sure. I'm going to read a little synopsis. I don't think there may be mild spoilers are in here for the first movie. So if you haven't seen the first movie by now, 5 years, you might get mild spoilers in here, nothing major, but here we go. Jake Pentecost is a once promising young Jaeger pilot and son of legendary Jaeger leader Stacker Pentecost, who battled against the kaiju invasion that was central to the story of the first Pacific Rim movie. 10 years later, Jake has squandered his legacy, abandoning his training, and become caught up in a criminal underworld. But when a new, seemingly unstoppable threat is unleashed to tear through cities and bring the world to its knees, Jake is given one last chance by his estranged sister, Mako Mori, to live up to his father's legacy. So there you have it. There's the synopsis for this movie. This one stars John Boyega, who we just saw in The Last Jedi. Love John Boyega. So I'll see just about anything he does. Returns Scott Eastwood, newcomer Bailey Spaney. This also returns Rinko Kikuchi, who was in the first movie. Charlie Day is in this, and Bern Gorman. I didn't know the guy's name before, but we've seen him in a lot of things like Torchwood. And kind of like that guy. Just didn't like his character in here, but we'll get to that. This one's directed by Stephen D. Knight, who I hadn't really heard of until I looked up his name for this movie. He's done previous directing work in Daredevil and Smallville. He wrote some stuff for those, but also Spartacus and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So mostly TV work for this guy. And this seems like a big step up to this big action-y tentpole movie, franchise movie. And taking the reins, especially from Guillermo del Toro. So that was back 5 years ago to the first Pacific Rim movie, right? Guillermo del Toro. We were super excited. I had sky-high expectations because, hey, this movie had promised to have some awesome kaiju, giant robots, and then, of course, the creativity and vision of a director like Guillermo del Toro, who we love, has done some of my favorite movies. As we talked about 5 years ago, when we were sitting in P-Town at Bear Week, I remember that like vividly. Unfortunately, that movie didn't quite meet the expectation, and I had high expectations for that movie. And although I didn't actively hate it, I was pretty lukewarm on that movie because I think of maybe my disappointment. So going into this one, I had actually kind of forgotten kind of the bad juju about that first movie, and also saw the new trailer a couple of times. And while the trailer didn't look very good, I knew that Guillermo del Toro was no longer with it, which may sound like a negative thing, but to me it was like, oh, maybe we'll see what somebody, like a relatively unknown could do with this franchise 5 years later. Maybe there'd be inject some new creativity into this. And so the idea of that fresh take kind of got me excited that we'd see kind of an improvement on the first movie. But man, was I wrong. Again, bummer. I ended up being doubly disappointed with this movie, Pacific Rim Uprising. Instead of being like a mild improvement or some kind of building on that first movie, it kind of went the other way for me. Being lesser kind of in all the categories. Yeah, I can't recommend this movie. I got a lot more to say about it, but I want to let you guys talk. We'll talk about more about impressions and spoilers, but this is a not recommend for me. I just did not have a very good time with this movie. Yeah, that's it. Just kind of a pass for me.
All right. One do not recommend / pass from Jim. Will, how about you? Because you, I think, were like way more excited and into the first movie than I think Jim or myself was. How did the second one come down for you?
Yeah, this was disappointing because, like you mentioned, the first Pacific Rim, I still hold that was probably the top 10 of the movies that came out that year, and it's the best of any giant robot or giant monster movie that I've seen since. Like, this is a movie that Guillermo del Toro injected so much love for, that Japanese influenced giant robot versus kaiju, that whole set of things from anime to even like Godzilla movies and things like that. It pulls a lot of those influences together and made something that was very unique, very fun, very exciting, and very fresh. If it was a love letter to that, this new one, Pacific Rim Uprising, is almost like a love letter to... It's like a Xeroxed copy of a love letter that transposed a few words. Specifically here, I felt like there was a lot more of an influence of Transformers than I think that there was some of those Japanese influences that made the first one so good. If you look at the color palettes of the robots, while it's not necessarily a very stark difference, everything is a lot more muted. Everything looks a lot more like muddy brown and gray, and so it looks like a Transformers movie more so than it looked like the first Pacific Rim. There are story elements that just did not need to be in here at all. You do have a few things that work. I think that John Boyega, while he didn't have a lot to work with, I think that he was incredibly charming, as was oh gosh, what is the actress's name? Kylie Spaney, who plays Amara, the other, I guess, the co-lead of this movie. I had no problem with them as leads. I think they were perfectly fine. I don't think the material suited their talents, and I felt like in some cases they were overperforming what they got. I think that there were some elements within the script itself that are fine when looked at in isolation, but at the end of the day, once you put all of this movie together, and when you put one major thing that is a spoiler, but something that we'll need to talk about, ultimately this movie is sort of pointless. You could have entirely skipped the story that this one told and moved on to what I'm sure will end up being Pacific Rim 3. You could probably have jumped straight to it and not had to go through the rigmarole of what we had here. So this is a pass for me, which is a shame. I went from a 5-star movie to a 2-star movie. That fucking sucks.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm really glad is the wrong word. I'm heartened to hear you say that, Will, because I was thinking back to our epic, like, throwdown, rock'em sock'em, almost like near fight we had back during that first Pacific Rim review, because I think we were both just very passionate on either side of the equation. And so seeing this movie, coming out of it with Jim, I'm like, I wonder what Will thinks about this movie. Like, I know kind of where we're at, but I wonder, like, are we seeing it the wrong way again? You know what I mean? So it's a little validating to me to hear you call out some of the same thoughts that we had on this film. I mean, 2 passes so far. I gotta say, this is a pass from me too, for all the reasons you guys have already mentioned. I wasn't the biggest fan of the first film to begin with, but one of the things that film did have going for it was one, and this was a complaint at the time that has now become a positive thing. It used a lot of darkness and rain to hide a lot of the bad CGI.
It seemed murkier to me.
Yeah, and this movie, I think, went out of its way to show the robots doing their thing in the daylight, and I think that may have been a response to that complaint. The problem is that while the technology has advanced, you're still very cognizant of the fact that, like, these are not real robots. These are not real monsters. And the daylight, I mean, it really does highlight some of the, some of the poor CGI in some cases. Like there's like, a robot will like swing its arm and hit, and there's like a small explosion or something. And it looks like someone just popped into Adobe After Effects for 5 seconds and put that together. Whereas maybe if it was in the dark, you know what I mean, it would mask a lot of that. So from a visual standpoint, I didn't feel like this one was as good as the first one, and the visuals in the first one were the main thing that sort of held me. John Boyega, I mean, I love John Boyega, but I thought he was completely and utterly wasted here. I just thought his character was just being sort of strung along because they needed someone from the first, with a connection to the first film to try and, I guess, hold this thing together. And I don't think that was the best way to go, unfortunately. He's a great actor, but I don't think he was given a lot of great stuff to work with, for one. Plus, I get that they're trying to do the whole ensemble cast thing. I get that maybe they're trying to launch a new generation of Jaeger pilots or whatever. I just felt like there were too many people. Like, it was hard for me to settle on, 2 or 3 people to care about. It was like, all right, well, we've got all these people. Oh, look, we didn't see some of these people for 2/3 of the movie. How convenient that they're showing up again toward the end. I don't know. It didn't work great for me. So this is also a pass. I don't know that I have much non-spoiler wise to say, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I just, you guys talk about how the movie looked, and there are differences. I get it. And the first one was darker. It was kind of hard to make out maybe some of the CGI stuff. This one was brighter, and maybe so that kind of highlighted some of the poor CGI. I got to be honest. The look of either movie did not bother me very much at all. It was everything else that bugged me about this movie. Like, yeah, I know it's a big giant CGI, like, cluster. You know what I mean? It's like the Transformers movies are the same thing. And that's what I felt before. I mean, watching this movie, I'm like, this is exactly like a Transformers movie. There's nothing that sets it apart. It doesn't have that magic that a Guillermo del Toro version would have to kind of set it apart from just a plain, robot bash 'em up movie. John Boyega, he's got charisma. The guy does. I love the guy. But in this movie, he totally gets swallowed up, and he cannot, as hard as he tries, he can't really save this movie. The other characters are either like, I did kind of like the young girl, but they gave her so many stupid lines that she became annoying, and I thought she had potential. The rest of the young kids, forget it, throwaway characters, like they don't do anything. Mm-hmm. And then you had some other characters, like villain characters, so over the top with the acting it was really cartoonish and didn't quite match with what I thought was the tone of the movie. So yeah, I mean, I don't like the Transformers film all that much, and I've seen them all, but like, this movie really is on a level with those, and that's a shame for this franchise for me.
And there's a couple of other differences too that I think really jump out. We've mentioned the color and we mentioned the way things look. I do think the CGI actually, I mean, granted, it's 5 years different. It looked better in the first film. I don't know why that is, but like, movies should get better with technology and not worse. And part of that is because I think Guillermo del Toro has a better use of, I don't think it's just darkness to mask CGI. I think it's also a use of color and contrast. Like, he was able to use these robots with these colorful hues against this dark sky with this light rain reflecting off of it and these like kind of neon lights inside. All of those things combined for very striking visuals. Here you had more grayed out robots against gray buildings. That's not good contrast. There's a big problem there. On top of that, the fight choreography was also worse. Like, we're talking like CGI robots fighting monsters and all of that stuff. And the first one, like the punches felt like they had some weight to them, like when the robots did the moves, it made sense within what they were doing. And here it felt like there were some punches that didn't land, or sometimes things would hit really hard and sometimes they would hit very soft. Like the physics felt a little funky. And then a third major difference, and Brad, you mentioned the cast here felt very throwaway, the supporting cast. One of the things that I think worked so well about the first one is it focused on a very international cast, and each of the characters, even if they didn't have much to do, had an arc. The three brothers had an arc. The kind of the rival father and son combo, they had an arc. Everyone had an arc, even if it was kind of minorly happening in the background or very, very lightly interacting. And so you got to see this globalist view, every country in the world banding together to protect, while also still having some of their conflicts. That was really cool, seeing both global, like micro and macro, like global stuff hitting. Here, you had a bunch of people from different countries because that's what happened in the first one. And, you know, you had the girl who was the Russian because you're going to have the Russian. And you had the guy who was the Asian because you're going to have the Asian. And you had the Indian character because he was going to be in. But their arcs were not developed. They didn't have it. They didn't really go anywhere. I think you had one character who had something that was starting to be an arc, and then it didn't go where, you know, it went where you were expecting, but it didn't go there in a satisfactory way. So it was really frustrating to think of this movie. Again, I said it in the beginning part. If all of those really cool elements that you would get out of an anime or out of a kaiju film, those are gone here, and you've just got someone trying to copy Pacific Rim instead of Pacific Rim, which borrowed elements from these other spots. And because of that, it feels very creatively bankrupt as a result.
Yeah. Do we want to do a spoiler section?
I don't know. Do we have stuff to talk about?
I'm okay with not going into spoilers if we can just sort of like, I can put the blanket statement out of there's a stinger, and I won't say what's in the stinger, but it's fair to say there's a stinger in a movie, right?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, if we want to talk about it, I'm totally fine. We can open up spoilers.
Yeah, short one.
Sure. Okay, because I don't even need to talk about what was in it. Just that.
Yeah. All right. So spoilers for Pacific Rim Uprising. Officially fair game. If you don't want spoilers, go ahead, skip ahead. If you're listening on digital tape delay, 10 minutes or so, use the handy dandy time index in the show notes. If you're listening live and you value your ignorance of the plot of this film, go ahead and mute us for the next little bit and come on back for some plugs. But spoilers, here we go. Will, let's talk about that little stinger there. So set that up for us.
Yeah, so at the end, so this movie, the major plot and through line of it is, now that we're 10 years in the future, we thought we had protected everything, but now this new plan happens. Now there's these new breaches and we have to defend ourselves again. Okay, great. So sort of a retread of the first one, but with more of a domestic threat that we can talk about. Maybe not, I don't care. Then we get this stinger where at the end, they're like, okay, you know, are we going to be ready for the next time? No, there's not going to be a next time, because next time we're taking the fight to them. And so they're basically saying like, okay, so Pacific Rim 3 essentially would be them going into the breach and fighting the precursors and stuff on their land, right? Why the fuck was that not this movie?
Right.
Yep. That's what this movie should have been. This movie should have been them going in and just kind of exploring this world and exploring all that. Some of the weird shit that happened in this movie, I think, was fine within the context of this movie. Like, was it cool to, you know, did it work? I think to have the Charlie Day character as a sort of a stealth spy type character, you know, performance aside, it went really weird. That was maybe a cool element, but it was also fairly pointless in the grand scheme of things, because again, all it did was repeat the first film. I wanted them to go into the breach. I thought that's what we'd be getting. I thought we would be getting, maybe it's a new batch of characters.
We got one glimpse of the breach, basically. One crappy little glimpse of the breach and a monster coming out, and like that was it.
And it was essentially the same glimpse of the breach that we had seen
Yeah.
beforehand, because the
Right.
last movie ended with a glimpse of, like, you know, the mental link and seeing the precursors and seeing all of that. So
Meanwhile, back at the breach.
we didn't learn anything new. All we knew is that this program that was in the process of being shut down is now very not being shut down. And now, you know, so it's just sort of reset the world. And that's boring. I don't need franchises that reset the world in between each time. I need ones that shake things up.
Well, speaking of shaking things up, I actually got really excited at one moment of the movie, and that was when all of the breaches started opening up. Because I was like, oh my God, that one
What's gonna
breach in the
happen
first
now?
movie.
Yeah.
Like, what's going to happen? There's 30 fucking breaches. And I was like, yes, oh my God, this is great. We're going to see like 50 monsters coming out of these breaches, and they take over the world at the end, and sets up the third movie, like, you know, having to reclaim things as the underdogs. If we weren't going into the breach, I was at least happy with complete and total monster takeover. But as quickly as all those breaches opened up and set the stage for this big, huge, scary thing, they closed the breaches that quickly. And
I forget how they said they did that. Was it like drones or something? Close the breaches, or
so what they had was, gosh, so the breaches were originally opened by the kaiju brains that were now
living
manning the drones, right?
Yeah.
And so they were basically focusing their fire and causing it. And so when those drones started being taken out, that's what stopped the breach, right? And it did lead for credit where credit is due. The scene of that one kaiju that was like halfway through the breach before it closed, and then it got ripped in half in the water, like, that was cool. That was a cool scene,
Yeah.
you know? But yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you, Brad. I think that it would have been cool to have seen what would have happened if we had more breaches open instead of just 3 monsters trudging forward. Especially when, this gets me to, I guess, another spoilery complaint. The first movie, it felt like every single one of those kaiju fights was a boss fight, right? Like, if we're taking video game terms, right? Like, every kaiju that came out, oh my gosh, it's a Cat 3. We're gonna have to really fight hard for it. By the time like a Cat 5, which is the biggest type of kaiju, comes out, oh my gosh, like, this is like the big boss, you know, like, cue the epic music, you know, it's going down. Here we had, I think, like at the very end of this one, 2 Cat 4s and a Cat 5, like, big bosses, and, you know, all come out, and they just get their asses handed to them by a bunch of kids, you know,
right.
Like, and very handily. Like, you know, we suffered a loss a little bit later on, but that was only after they went into their morphed, molded form, which I don't have a problem with that. Just so you know, like Voltron and all these things, like, combining together to form a bigger version of something. I don't like, it was cool that the kaiju formed a bigger one, but it sucked that they were so easily beaten by these kids beforehand, before we had, I think, like, 1 casualty there at the very end against the bigger version of it. It just felt like there weren't any stakes. Think back to the first one. Again, I can't help compare the two, but, you know, this is the sequel. I think you had, like, what, 2 of those characters out of, like, probably a cast of like 8 or 9 kind of central characters that made it out of that first film. You kept getting those characters whittled down and whittled down and whittled down. Well, here, literally 1 loss.
Yeah. This movie had to set up the John Boyega character, right? It had that job to do, because obviously the hero of the first movie is gone. Can't bring him back. So it needed to spend some time on that, which it kind of did, although I still really didn't feel much for the John Boyega character. Also, we got what amounted to me to like one big Jaeger versus kaiju fight, right? At the end, when the 3 monsters were basically, they came out of the ocean, and then they're converging on this point, Mount Fuji, right? In Tokyo, by the way. Or near Tokyo. And like a minute after they came out, and I'm like, I don't know whether this trailer spoiled me, or it was just that obvious that these monsters were going to combine into one giant monster. I even turned to Brad at one point in the movie. I said, here we go. They're going to combine into one monster and we're going to fight that. And sure enough, that's what happened. And that battle was kind of cool once it happened, but it was kind of too little too late. It was right at the very end of the movie. And they did kind of dispatch that big monster pretty quickly with mostly kids and the Boyega character. But I don't know. I would have liked to have seen more. I mean, in the first movie, we got several instances of monsters coming out, and it's like, oh my God, what's going to come out next? What are we going to have to fight next? We have no idea what's going to come out of the breach in the bottom of the ocean. This time, it just happened once. We got a couple of monsters. They fought. I kind of dug. There was a flashback scene to the family kind of on the boardwalk on the pier, and there's a kaiju that comes out, and it's broad daylight, and I thought that looked kind of cool to me. It looked very much like what we saw in the last Godzilla movie in terms of the effects, and I thought that scene worked pretty well. I would have liked to have seen more. I don't know, just more of the kaiju and have more variation, I guess, in the kaiju. They still kind of look the same as the last movie too. So they haven't really done much evolving either. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Jim, I think it was all saved by the epic snowball fight at the end and then fade to black.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not weird. Like,
what the fuck?
Monster battle, monster dies, snowball fight, end.
Someone in the editing, there's someone in the editing bay is like, okay, great. You can't hand me reel 75. I want to add that on to the end of this. They're like, oh, that's all we shot. That's all you shot? How the fuck am I supposed to end this? Okay, fade to black. No, it was really awkward. It was really bad. You didn't get any closure for these characters, nor did you really need any, because their arcs were not very solid. John Boyega's was, I don't want to follow in my father's footsteps. Well, you kind of have to, or you'll go to jail. Okay, I want to follow in my father's footsteps. That was literally his arc. Like he didn't really rebel against it very much. He was just like, okay, I guess I'm just going to be the best damn sergeant ever now that I'm here. The movie set him up to be this sort of rebellious punk, but as soon as he's in place, he sort of falls right into line.
Oh, come on, Will. It's not like it's not like we've seen daddy issues in a big tentpole movie before, right? I mean, that you got to give the movie credit for that, story writing.
Oh, and for doing it poorly. I wouldn't even mind if it went to that same well, because I mean, legacy is a big part of sequels, right? That's why we have some of the conversations we have about the new Star Wars films and some of the decisions they make. Legacy is a thing that happens in sequels, and done right, it can be a good thing. But it almost felt like it was stitched in randomly just so we can say, oh yeah, we really like John Boyega, and also let's just say he's this guy's son. It just felt like felt very shoehorned in, very tacked on. You also ended up with we're in spoilers, and Craig mentions this in chat too. You can talk about Mako and the tragedy that her character was. So sad. This is a character who I enjoyed quite a bit in the first film, and here she is. Yes, it's tragic that her character dies. It's even more tragic that her character didn't really get a chance to live on screen before her death. If you're going to kill off a character in a noticeable way, you need to give them some things to do. You need to make sure their death has an impact. And yes, from a story perspective, they tried to give her some impact. She passed along this important piece of information.
She brings the John Boyega character back into the kaiju force.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there are some definite things that she does, but they're not really anchored. They're not really anchored in anything that gives any heart or gives any character. In fact, even her death is seen really it's seen from a distance. If you think about it, the way that scene is shot, it's you see that everything, you see that she's about to crash, you see from Boyega's perspective, I'm going to try to save her, and then it doesn't. And then you see a not terribly close up of the Fireball helicopter. This is the type of character you shoot that exact same shot. Let's assume the rest of the movie doesn't have issues. You do the exact same shot, but you do it more from her perspective instead. You have that moment of her panicking, maybe that moment. There's something that could humanize and make that death like hit us a little bit more, but we don't. She doesn't die off screen, but she might as well.
Well, that's because it's setting up the third movie, Will. I mean, she actually did a really cool superhero jump out of the helicopter, landed on one knee in a superhero pose, and dashed to the secret hangar of her secret Jaeger that's going to actually go into a breach next time. So she's biding her time, but she had to make everyone think that she died in order to set up her arc for the next movie. So
she's got a super version of what was the junkie robot at the beginning? Scrapper. Yeah, it's a super scrapper. No.
As bad as that sounds, it would essentially sort of like retcon the major thing that happened in this movie. So I'm not necessarily opposed to like some fuckery. Like, it's like, like if we go into the third one and they basically assume that most of the second one didn't happen, like my feelings aren't going to be hurt. That said, as much as I've trashed this movie, I do want to say I keep comparing it to the Transformers movies. I'll still say I think that, and maybe this just goes to show how little I think of the Transformers movies. This is the best Transformer movie.
I'm not sure I can agree. I think there were more.
Me either.
I think there were more meaningful relationships between non-human characters in the Transformer movie than there were the human ones here.
I see,
and that's what I go for. You know what I mean? Action wise, they're a wash.
I can't even get in on that because you end up with the Shia LaBeouf character. Like, he's in a few of them, and nothing against Shia LaBeouf. I think he actually does some decent work, but Michael Bay actually goes out of his way to trash that character every chance he does. Like, the director hates his main character, so that by the time you get to Mark Wahlberg, who I guess
I'm talking non-human. I'm talking like Optimus Prime and Bumblebee. Their relationships in that movie are better than any human relationship in this specific Rim movie. Maybe.
I don't know. I still would put this one slightly ahead of it, but I mean, we are talking like, again, I said I think this one's about a 2-star movie for me, which is in the not.
And you don't watch them. We make you watch them.
Oh God, the Transformers movies are my annual chore. But yeah, I mean,
that's the last one though.
What's that?
Didn't we see the last one?
We did. Well, no, until Bumblebee comes out.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
Right. We'll just have to settle for Optimus Gypsy Avenger.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, guys, let's wrap this conversation up and move on maybe to some plugs. What do we think? Are we ready?
Sure.
Yeah, I think so.
When I say plugs, that makes me think of Neon Genesis Evangelion, which makes me think of giant robots fighting giant monsters that are 1,000 million times % better than Pacific Rim 2. So, Jim, maybe we should go finish that series.
Maybe, because I don't know what the relationship between plugs and Evangelion is.
That's the little things that they were inside of.
They were called plugs. Yeah. Gotcha.
Remember the humans are in the plugs hooked up to the machines, and they're filled with like a liquid, and
I forgot that they were called plugs. I thought they were pods.
Oh, that's okay.
So sue me. You know,
I'm not gonna sue you. All right, so let's do some plugs. I just want to say, super pumped. Ready Player One is coming out this week. We got a chance to see Ready Player One. Jim and I did, at least at South by Southwest. Definitely looking forward to seeing it again. Will, I'm very curious about your thoughts on the film. So we're going to be talking about it next week here on the show. Go check it out this weekend. I won't say anything. I don't want to influence anybody, but definitely go see it and come on back for the conversation. Jim, what have you got this week?
I ended up seeing a movie that's been on my list for a while since it got a lot of buzz. I think last year it's a French film called BPM, Beats Per Minute. It's So what this movie is about, it's set in France in 1990s around an ACT UP group. And for those who aren't familiar with ACT UP, it's a how do I put it? It's a activist group, primarily made up of people who are being activists for HIV infection and people who are suffering with AIDS. And this happened in the 1990s. It's kind of goes between what happens, kind of what ACT UP is, and this kind of group of people that got together and did these acts of activism to make the public in France aware and to battle kind of the corporations and bureaucracy involved. And also there's a personal story in here between some characters within the ACT UP organization that was very affecting, very honest, brutally blunt. It's an AIDS story, so there's a lot of drama, there's a lot of emotion in it. I would definitely recommend this movie. It's called Beats Per Minute, or BPM, Beats Per Minute. You can find it. I think I rented it on iTunes, but it's on my list for a while. Definitely worth looking for. It won a lot of awards at the Cannes Festival last year. Great film, great LGBT film. Again, another look back at a really dark time in the LGBT community, but I think this film is really worth watching.
All right. Awesome. And Will, what have you got this week?
Yeah, so this, Brad, you can plug your ears for a couple seconds because I'm going to give a quick plug for Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs, which is out in theaters as of last weekend. And it is his stop motion movie about this isle off of the coast of like a fictionalized version of Japan, where all of the dogs are put there because they have the dog flu. And it's a scrappy little adventure story about a bunch of outsiders banding together. There's also like a lot of like kind of the ostracizing of the other that definitely comes into play here. This is probably Wes Anderson's darkest movie, just in that like you really get to see some of his animation that he uses here can be quite ugly at times, and by that I mean like you're seeing trash heaps and like bugs and like fleas crawling across dogs,
rotten
and
food,
and the animals sometimes have wounds and stuff like that. Like this is not like it doesn't sugarcoat over that stuff, but it's also one of his most hopeful, especially with the kind of the bond between like a young boy and his dog. So I'm absolutely in love with Isle of Dogs. If you want to hear more about it, I've got a written review up on our website at moviebearspodcast.com. But yeah, you should check out Isle of Dogs. It's the goods.
All right. Very good. Well, guys, it's been another fun show. Definitely looking forward to next week for our Ready Player One discussion. Guys, real quick, where can people find you online if they want to chat about the movies?
You can find me. This is Jim. You can find me at JJP Out West on Twitter. I'm not on Instagram, but I am on Facebook under my name, Jim Pugliafico. You could also find me there. Hit me up, chat me up, at me, whatever. Love to hear from you.
All right. Will, how about you?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jim. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Whatever Cove. I use the same ID on both. You can find me on Facebook. I'm William Lindis. Just send me a message, please, first, because I want to know that you're a listener of the show and someone I want, that I'll chat with instead of just a bear collector. That's the thing, right? Like, just someone who randomly adds you and then like posts inappropriate things on your pictures. So, which I'm not opposed to, but also like I keep my stuff unlocked and people from work can see stuff. So I'm picky. So just let me know that you're a real person. You can also find me on Letterboxd, where I review everything that I've seen, including the 100+ movies I've watched this year alone. Just look for me, William Lindis on Letterboxd. You can see what I think about a bunch of movies.
All right, awesome. And you can find me On Facebook, just search for Brad Harris. I'm the one with a bunch of bear and chub friends probably in common with you. You can find me on Twitter at iBradPro. And guys, that wraps us up for this week. We'll see y'all next time for Ready Player One. Have a good week, everyone. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.